Well, let's talk about business. Small businesses, those with fewer than 500 employees, so probably almost everybody who's watching right now, make up the backbone of the U.S. economy. I mean, forget the carriers, the Apples, the Microsofts, and Fords. 99.7% of U.S. businesses are all small businesses, less than 500 people, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Small Business Association. So while politicians and the president try to make points by kicking large companies around and in some cases creating incentives for them in the name of helping the American economy, it's the small businesses like all of us here pretty much that are doing the heavy lifting. We're the ones that really need the help. I mean, who cares? I mean, honestly, when you get down to the impact on the economy, it's not the 100,000 employee companies or 50,000 employee companies that are making the difference.
As big as they are.
As big as they are, and as many jobs as they do. It's a drop in the bucket compared to all the, and by the way, 99.7% for 500 employees or less. Guess what the percentage is for just 20 employees or less?
Probably still real high, 90%.
90%. 90% of companies in the United States are 20 employees or less. In his article, How Speeding Up Payments to Small Businesses Creates Jobs, author Jean-Noel Barreau points out that one very helpful action that can help small businesses is to simply pay them quicker. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
There you go.
Amen, brother.
Man, when a business is not paid for weeks after a sale, says Barreau,
months sometimes,
or months, 3 months, it is effectively providing short-term financing to its customers. And this is something that's well known and it's called trade credit. This is recorded in the balance sheet as accounts receivable. So to explain this, if I buy something from Mike, rather than pay him right away, I delay payment, right? And that money collects interest, it looks good on my bottom line, I can use that money, and so forth. Multiply that by all of my vendors, and for a big company with lots of little vendors, that could mean millions of extra dollars that is carried along in the books, and all that extra money is free cash, and they can use it however they want, right? Now, that is awesome. For the big company.
Sure.
Not so great for this little company. It's a major source of funding for the U.S. economy. And according to Barreau, the use of trade credit is recorded in the company's accounting statements as trade payables in the liability section of their balance sheet. According to the Federal Reserve, trade payables amounted to $2.1 trillion, that's trillion with a T, on non-financial companies' balance sheets at the end of the third quarter of 2006. $2.1 trillion. That's just there for them to use, right? Great for those companies who delay in paying, not so awesome for the small business who sell to these large businesses and for whom cash flow is a critical issue. So what does all this have to do with government and politicians? Well, Europe passed a directive, those Europeans, in 2011 requiring that intercompany debts be paid within 60 days. A study done by Barreau looking at the impact of this directive on French companies in particular showed that requiring payments to be made within a shorter time period had a large effect on small businesses' survival, their very survival. Receiving their money earlier led them to default less often on their own suppliers and financiers, and their probability to go bankrupt dropped by a quarter. Now, the U.S., we've actually done the same thing here on a very limited scale. The U.S. government did its own limited experiment of this, something called the Quick Pay Reform. It was announced in 2011, and it accelerated payments from the federal government to a small subset of small business contractors in the U.S., shrinking the payment period from 30 days to 15 days, thus accelerating $64 billion in annual federal contract value. Collectively, the new policy, which accelerated $64 billion in payments, as I said, increased annual payroll, this was the positive side, increased annual payroll by $6 billion and created just over 75,000 jobs in the 3 years following reform. So take a look at all this hubbub we're bringing 1,000 jobs back into the country. Woo!
$75,000.
$75,000, 75,000 new jobs simply by paying small subcontractors fast. And this was just a small subset of U.S. contractors, right? And it was only U.S. contractors. Now, some of you are nodding your head, going, yeah, I get it. But for those of you who don't, let's bring it down to the real level. This is a comment that we got from a reader, and I'm abridging this quite a bit because it was a long comment, but it's worth reading this comment. My brother had started a contract manufacturing precision machining business. He financed the capital equipment with hard-earned savings and a note on his home. CNC machine tools are not cheap, as many know. He built his business by providing high-quality work for a fair negotiated price. After several years gaining valuable and valued customers, he began work for a well-known aerospace company. The orders from the aerospace company grew rapidly until it was a significant portion of his revenue. In one phone call, it all came crashing down. The big aerospace company called and told him they had to extend payments out to 120 days, that's 4 months, people, as they were experiencing a rough financial patch. Multi-billion-dollar company, yeah. My brother negotiated, sorry, that was my little in comment. Okay. My brother negotiated, threatened, argued, and pleaded as his action would certainly put him out of business and possibly lose his home. They had no empathy or willingness to negotiate, and sadly, my brother had to close his business and auction all the almost new equipment as his cash flow was so severely impacted by their actions. Closing the business meant job losses for a few people, and this was very sad, but it is really larger than that. This customer's forced payment extension also caused loss of rent for the owner of the leased shop space, lost new business opportunity for my brother's suppliers, and lost taxes on wages and so forth that would have been paid to the local, state, and federal government. End of that comment. So, if the new administration really wants to help create jobs, they might want to take a look at how small businesses are treated, even if by the government or government contractors. I mean, we get this focus on all these big companies because those make the news. I'm going to shame Carrier, I'm going to call out Ford. And that makes headlines, right? Because everybody knows those companies, right? Who knows about Quality Digest or Micro Ridge or VeriSurf, little companies, right? That, less than 100 employees, less than 50 employees. Who knows about them, right? Those don't make any news, but those are the backbone of the U.S. economy.
The U.S. economy, sure. Right. And I mean, this idea that there's a kind of an escalating approach that goes when a company's hitting a rough spot, that, as they mentioned, this big aerospace company had a rough
But what's
patch.
a rough spot for $1 billion company?
Well, sure, but what happens is a low-hanging fruit, like you're saying in your run-up. I mean, these are funds that somebody, some bean counter looked at and said, well, I mean, we can make this much more if we extend this out from net 30 to net 120.
Net 120.
And it's like, well, what are they going to do? What are you going to do? Because you know what? As good of a supplier as you may be, you're a commodity. I mean, it's a sad fact of capitalism that commoditization of these industries happen, and I just don't know what you can do about it. I mean, I think that ultimately you're going to be at the behest of the big boys, your customers, and you got to just do the best you can. You got to service them the best you can and try to convince them that you need your money too, as quick as you can get it. And
because trust me, if we go to the bank and say, hey, we're going to pay you in 4 months.
Yeah, my mortgage, I'm going to do 4 months on that.
I'm going to do 4 months. Is that okay with you guys?
Sure. No.
Sure, yeah, no problem. Go ahead, Mike. Love your house.
Yeah, loved your house, Mike.
Loved your house, Mike. That was nice.
Remember that? But that plastic thing you got there, that's nice too. That one you have now, that little igloo. Yeah. Well,